This is Leonard Ravenhill's biography, In the Light of Eternity. It's a pretty big book. It took me a while to finish it, but really enjoyed it a lot. But he had a burning evangelistic call on his life. He walked the breadth of England, preaching in every single city. He walked there and he walked back. So this guy established churches all over England and preached. They were called the Trekkers. How many of you have ever heard of the Trekkers? Yeah, some of you have studied already this. So the Trekkers were a group of young people, and they walked and they slept in churches, in fields, all kinds of things, and they trusted God to supply their needs as they walked the breadth of England, preaching the gospel. What characterized them was they would set up in a city for sometimes even 2 weeks, and they'd preach every day in the city square for 2 weeks, just living there and getting people born again and establishing a work before they would leave to the next city. They did this trusting the Lord completely, but one of the things that characterized them was their great joy. They preached with tremendous joy. As a matter of fact, in here there's written a couple of accounts of people that encountered the Trekkers, and what stuck out to these people about them was they noted their joy, which is beautiful to me because that's the essence of the gospel. But Leonard Ravenhill, burning with evangelism, walking the breadth of England, literally preaching all the time. He said, somebody said to him one time, I don't have the pulpit preaching. And Ravenhill looked at him and he says, you can't find one street corner? So this is the kind of evangelistic call he had on his life. But check this out. At one point, there's a fire in Chicago. You guys remember the Chicago fire. Ravenhill's there and he has to jump out the window to survive. And he breaks nearly every bone in his body and he's in traction for over a year. And in this time, listen to this, he writes, he said, I had been lying in the hospital bed for weeks at this time. And he says, one night, like many others, I couldn't sleep because of the pain. And he says, so I opened to the 7th chapter of Luke's Gospel, and I read these words from the mouth of Jesus. You gave me no water, you gave me no oil, you gave me no kiss. And he said that when he read this, he goes, I had been scheduled to preach around the world. Now I couldn't preach anywhere. And I realized in this moment, when he read this, you gave me no kiss. I realized in this moment, for the first time, I could now do the only thing God requires of me. I could worship Him. And it says, from this day on, Leonard Ravenhill was a different man. I say that to say that though he was burning with evangelism, it was in the incapacitated state where he had to face what really, really mattered, which was this, his heart touching God's heart. It shifted his life forever after this. And I wanted to just encourage you with that because when I read that, I thought it was just a tremendous lesson for evangelists. Yeah. That this is really, when it comes down to it, and you can't preach anywhere, this is what God is looking at. Can your heart touch my heart? That's the root issue. Madame Guyon, in this biography that I've been reading, I think I told you guys this, there's an account of her prayer life, and I thought this was just so beautiful. I want to share it with you. She would go away to be alone with God. Her practice in prayer was silence. Now listen closely to this. Such had been her devotional habits, getting quiet before God. So much so that she entered into this state in a remarkable manner. The mind was turned upward to God. Her closed or uplifted eye, with her closed but uplifted inward eye, her hands were clasped together, her serene countenance, abstracted from worldly influences, but lighted up with a divine ray, left the conviction upon those who were present with her that her soul was in communion with the eternal, too deep for the utterance of words. She literally was wrapped in the sweetness of God's glorious presence. And I wrote down a couple of more things that I wanted to share with you about this glory that we have with the Lord. In Luke chapter 24, we see that Jesus expounds to them the things concerning Himself in the Scriptures. Do you remember this? And they felt something, right? Their hearts began to burn. But they don't recognize Jesus until they're sitting together eating. And it hit me that words may make your heart burn, but only reclining with Him at the table will cause you to see Him. It's important for us to recognize that in Luke chapter 24, verse 24, those that had seen the tomb empty, they had evidence and conviction that Jesus was alive, but they still had not yet seen him. And I think a lot of people live their lives like this. They believe, they have conviction that Jesus is alive. They have evidence that Jesus is alive, but they haven't yet seen him. It's in the seeing of him that they were filled with joy abundant. So much so that the phrase actually says they were beyond belief. Like, this is just too much for me. And then the next thing that I want to show you is in 27 and 30. We see that the teaching of Jesus could not replace communion with Jesus. Which is very important, because sometimes, like I said, we love the teaching and get the burning of the heart, but we need to go and sit and commune for our eyes open to recognize him. And this is how our eyes open to recognize him, is by sitting with him. And listen to this phrase. I would memorize this if I was you, because it's amazing. In order for the bride to come out of herself, she must first forget herself. In order for the bride to come out of herself, that's the ascension unto God, she must forget herself. In other words, the more you're latched onto the things that have to do with you and your own person, your own personality, or somebody did this to me or this, you will not be able to go up out of yourself. You can only go up and out of yourself as you forget yourself. I remember hearing Pastor Benny. I traveled with him for a while for Reinhard Bonnke. I set up Reinhard Bonnke booths at every Benny Hinn crusade for a couple of years. And so I remember seeing Benny Hinn lift his hands in worship, and he would say, "Forget yourself now." And I would, in my early, this is 2002, I'd be like, "Forget yourself? What in the world?" But I began to grasp and understand that it is my consciousness of self that robs my consciousness of God. And so here it is, that in order for the bride to come out of herself, she must forget herself. John Owen says this. Guys, I wrote this down with so much joy. I can barely read it because I couldn't wait to share it with you guys. John Owen says, "Many cannot get quiet because their minds are so cluttered up with the earthly things." He says it must be raised above the things here below if we wish to see the beauty of the person of Jesus. So it is literally having our eyes fixed on the lower things that block our eyes to seeing the highest thing, which is Jesus. He goes on and he says, if our minds and our hearts are filled with other things, how can we expect to fellowship with him? We must let go of all these things. This is the surrender on the altar for the fire to make you a fragrance unto the Lord. So the enjoyment of God is commonly called, this is John Owen still, the beatific vision. How many of you have heard this phrase before? Beautific vision. Let me see your hands. Nobody. So this is a common motif of mystical theology. This is a beatific vision. So the, what is this? Is this a camera?
Yeah.
That's
for live stream.
Oh, okay, sorry. So a common motif. It's not live? Okay. Matthias is watching. Okay. Matthias is in there? A common motif in Christian theology is that we believe that we might understand. But the motif of Christian mysticism or experience of God is that we believe that we may experience him. And so the beatific vision is the enjoyment of God by experience. So the enjoyment of God is commonly called the beatific vision. And then he follows it by saying, this is our only motive. What? To see him. I just love it. So now this next one is crazy. This is from Maria of the Incarnation. She wrote, there is no limit to the interior experience of God. It seems to the soul that there is nothing beyond this joy, overwhelmed by the immense riches of its spouse. Isn't that beautiful? The divine pleasures, the nourishment and rest it receives, the holy intoxication it enjoys, moves the soul to sing a loving wedding hymn to him. Now guys, this is 700 years ago. She didn't know about Brian Simmons in the Passion Translation, okay? She literally was experiencing the glory of God. So the last one is Markyrios from Markyrios the Great. He writes, "The soul finds rest in the deepest quietness and joy in this perfect peace, perfectly fixed with spiritual delight and ineffable deep repose." Isn't this beautiful?
Yeah.
This kind of language and stuff really just moves me. I say all this to bring back to where I started. We are, or you guys here are anointed with the oil to preach the good news and to declare freedom to the captives, to heal the sick, to open the eyes of the blind, to break in the gospel in regions that are harsh and dark. You have the sword of the Lord. You are called to do this. But underneath all of this, there must be the beatific vision. Because it's the revealing on the inside that causes you to be able to proclaim Him. Right? He revealed His Son in me. And then you can proclaim and preach Him. The day that you stop seeing Him on the inside of you is the day your gospel becomes flat. Your gospel remains vibrant and alive as you continue to stare at the man who is that gospel. We need the beatific vision to preach the beautiful gospel. Does that make sense to you guys? So Father, I thank you that none of us will forget this because your Spirit will seal it forever. We are desperately, daily in need of this deep repose, this internal beatific vision of enjoying your person above everything else, heart to heart. Lord, I pray that we will come to this revelation that Ravenhill came to in traction. We'll come to it right here.
Yes.
Now we choose it. Yes, we believe that heart to heart is the heart of the issue. And from there, everything else will flow with ease and simplicity by your own power, by your own Spirit. Here, fishy, fishy. In Jesus' name. Amen.